And Mike,
Okay.
okay, there we go.
Right. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second session of Holland Responds to our Climate Conference. Nice rainy day for something like that. This session is how do we move ahead? And our speaker today, this afternoon, is Don Treisenberg. He's a scientist, teacher, and community advisor. Don's career includes 20 years as an administrator at the American University in Washington, D.C., and 16 years as a high school science and math teacher. Since his retirement, Don has served on several West Michigan boards and committees related to environmental issues. Today, Don participates in the Holland Climate Change Collaborative and works with Hope College developing air quality monitors for the middle school and the high school students. Don is a graduate of Alvin College and has a PhD in physics from the University of Maryland. So welcome, Don.
Thank you, Mike. And hi to everybody. When I was a teacher, I always said at the beginning of class, it's good to see that you came back. I'd like to start by asking you for your comments or thoughts about that wonderful presentation that Peter gave last week. What do you remember? What struck you about what he said? What lingering question do you have? Let's put ourselves back into the story and remember where we were last week. So Susan, I'm not sure how we invite people to talk, but if someone has something they'd like to say about what they remembered last week or what they are hoping to hear this week.
Yeah, by all means, just unmute yourself and we welcome your participation.
Well, just to get the ball rolling a little bit, one of the things that that stuck in my mind from Peter's presentation was the discussion of how much carbon dioxide pollution per capita, per person we put into the air in our area in a year, and his discussion of the limits or the reductions that we're trying to attain that were originally set for I believe 2050 or 2030, and the need to try to reduce it significantly more. I think the image of 6 elephants being put in the air in terms of volume of pollution also is something that sticks in my mind.
Thank you, Al. We're going to come back to that for sure. Anybody else?
Well, I remember he challenged us to write to our representatives, and so I have done that, and I wrote to both senators and to Huizenga, and then also to the state senator and representative as well in our area. So at least they'll hear that I want them to be serious about climate change.
You're my hero. That's where we're headed today, so thank you. Anyone else?
You didn't want gamma review, you wanted stick.
Well, one of the things that struck me is that we only have 10 years to fix this. I don't know if you can hear me or not. And I thought that was kind of a wake-up call.
Thank you. It's starting to sound like my presentation this week is unnecessary and redundant, but you all got the points very well. Anyone else? So my thoughts about using our time this week, a couple of things about process. I'd much rather have discussion than get through my slides. So don't be shy. Even more than discussion, we're looking for action. This is kind of the altar call week of trying to encourage you all to do what some of you have already said you're planning to do or have done in terms of contacting our community leaders. I have like 4 small sets of slides, things to talk about, and between each one we can have some discussion time. But the first set will be a little bit more about the climate challenge that we see in front of us. The second set will be my attempt to set a little bit of context for discussing that challenge. The third set of slides will be a couple of slides that I hope convey the message that while the challenge is real, we have solutions. It's not an impossible situation. Although, as someone has already mentioned, the solutions can be daunting, but they're there. The obstacle is not that we don't have solutions. The obstacle is that our political leaders who have to implement these solutions are nervous about doing so. And the main point of today is for me to say, they need your permission to implement the solutions. They're worried that you won't like it. They need to hear from you that they have the permission of their constituents to implement the solutions. So that, and as you can tell by this first slide, I think that happens by people telling their stories. And so that's where we're headed today. And let's get started. So 3 different slides to try to reinforce the definition of this climate problem that we have. Just 3. And the first one says, do you remember your first car? I'll give you a minute to think about it. But in the mid-60s, when I was a college student, I bought a used 1958 Chevy. That's not it. I found a picture on the web the other day. It's the same color as the one I had. So that was my first car. I hope that you have in your mind's eye some remembrance of your first car. And I used that car for a couple of years to putter around Calvin's campus in Grand Rapids. And then when I graduated, I got married and we drove 1,000 miles to Washington, D.C. in our new home. So that was our road trip, our first road trip in this new car. Do you remember your first road trip? I hope it was fun for you. Here's the problem that I want you to recognize. All of the CO2 that came from that car while I owned it is still in the atmosphere. CO2 emitted from our burning of fuels does not go away. It accumulates. So if you think that the climate problem is because of some power plant that's burning coal today, you're of course right. But it's also due to that road trip you took in your first car. All that CO2 is still there. And it's not going to go away for a long time. That means that this process of heating up the earth has momentum. If we could throw a switch and end all fossil fuel burning today, we would still have 100 years of climate heating from the CO2 from your first car. It has momentum. A second part that I'd like you to understand is once you have this idea that the CO2 stays there, it leads to the sense of a carbon budget. Scientists tell us that the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, when it increases, the warming increases. We can't get rid of what's there. We put it there with our first car. So the question becomes, and that stays there and that momentum keeps going. So after all the study, I'm just going to say one sentence of what the scientists have concluded, and it has to do with those two fractions. If we want a 2/3 chance of avoiding the worst of climate crisis, we have to cut our fossil fuel use in half in the next 10 years. So someone already commented that they were impressed by that last week, and I just want to underscore that. I think it is a startling scientific statement, so let me say it again. If we want to have, not 100%, if we want to have 67%, a 2/3 chance of avoiding climate catastrophe, we have to cut our carbon emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. There's only a certain budget of how much we can put up into the atmosphere. We've already put more than half of what we're allowed to put up there. So we've got 10 years to cut our use. If we continue at our current rate of use, we will have completed our carbon budget in 7 to 10 years, and then we'll have catastrophe. We can't throw the switch off completely today, but if we want to stay within the carbon budget and avoid catastrophe, we have to reduce our use of fossil fuel by 50% every 10 years. Now, I have one more slide. And this is where I'm going to need Susan's help, and I'm not sure it's going to work. But I have a little program on my computer that makes this point. And so I have to get to the computer program section of my computer and share that. So Susan, can you help me through that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Find your toolbar, and I think that we discovered that it was
It's up on top, and I hit new share.
new share, and then you're going to look for the
There
box.
it is.
There
got
it is. We'll see. Everybody keep their fingers crossed.
Oh, can
You're
you see?
amazing.
Okay. Give me a second here. All right, I think we might have it, Susan.
Awesome.
I think it's hard for me, at least, to take on the significance of the statement that the best we can hope for with big changes over the next 10 years is a 2/3 chance of avoiding catastrophe. So I've made up this little fable that helps me deal with this statement, and I'm wondering what your reaction might be. So let's pretend, here's the story. 50 rabbits arrive on a deserted island. The island has resources to support the good life for up to 1,000 rabbits. Happy in their new home, our rabbits procreate in the way that rabbits will. And when the rabbit number reaches 500, from 50 to 500, they're not dumb. They get together and they say, we're going to moderate our procreation to serve our resources, because the island has a limit of 1,000. If nonetheless our rabbit population, despite their best intentions, exceeds 1,000, the rabbits will suffer the consequences. And as always with such things, an element of chance is involved. So that's the story. What a scientist would do with a story like that to try to predict the future, given that chance is involved, is to create a model. So in this case, we're going to create a model that says, every time it's time for another generation of rabbits, let's flip a coin and see what happens. So you can read this table quickly. If the population is under 500, the rabbits have a carefree lifestyle with plenty of resources. They flip a coin in our model. If it comes up heads, each pair of rabbits has 6 bunnies. So the rabbit population triples. If the coin flip comes up tails, each pair of rabbits has 4 bunnies, so the rabbit population doubles. Why not? It's a carefree lifestyle. But when they get halfway to the limits of the island, they begin to be more cautious. And so the coin flip, the generational growth is smaller. If it's heads, rabbit population doubles. If it's tails, the rabbit population just replaces itself. But if they should go over 1,000, which is the limit of the island, then they have trouble. It's overcrowded, there's disease, lifestyle is chaotic. So flip the coin in this case, if it comes up heads, population shrinks by 50%. Could be COVID or something. If it comes up tails, the population shrinks by 70%. It's just a model. And if perchance it should actually go above 1,500 when the limit of resources on the island is 1,000, their lifestyle becomes catastrophic with famine and war. Flip a coin, it comes up heads, only 90% of the population is wiped out. If it comes up tails, the poor rabbits go extinct. That's the model. It's not hard to write a computer program that simulates this model. So let's take a look. First generation has 50 rabbits. Generation 2 has 150 rabbits. I guess they got a heads on their coin flip, and their life remains carefree. The next generation went from 150 to 450. Behind the scenes here, the computer is just picking a random number like a coin flip. Life is still carefree, but we're getting close to that 500 point. Wow, it doubled. Now we have 900 rabbits. We're close to the limits of the island. I like this because every time I do it, a different graph gets drawn because these the coin flips are truly random. So there's a million different possibilities. Uh-oh, 1,700, 1,800 rabbits. We're at that point where if it's heads, they only lose 90%. And if it's tails, they go extinct. Cross your fingers. Oh, they made it. They didn't go extinct. They just had a big catastrophe. And so on down the line. And the question is, will these rabbits survive for 20 generations? And it turns out that they did. Now we could do that again and again and again and again, but my thumb gets tired from clicking all of those step by step. Oops, here we go. So now I've rewritten the program to do all 20 coin flips at once so you can see the 20 generation history of the rabbits. This time they didn't make it. No, they went, oh, but here's another set. This time they made it through 16 generations and went extinct on the 17th. This time they went extinct earlier on. This time they made it for 20 generations. Good for them. This time they almost made it, but not quite. I did this. It's an exercise I used to do with some of my students, coin flips, graph paper, magic markers, and all the rest. And it was always amazing to me that hardened middle school students would wind up cheering and keeping their fingers crossed, hoping that their rabbits would make it. Here's the final graph under this. Every time I click down here, the program runs 100 trials and tell me how many of them led to extinction and how many of them led to survival. In this case, 60% of 60 out of 100 trials, 20 generations each, survived, 40% went extinct. And you can do this all day long, and it comes out about like our climate problem. It comes out about like these rabbits, this model of these rabbits shows that they have a 2/3 chance of survival. So let me stop there. I've tried to define in non-scientific terms the basic elements of our climate problem. It's not new. It started when you got your first car. We've all put our share of CO2 in the atmosphere. We've reached a point where there's only 7 to 10 years left if we keep doing what we're doing. And even if we are successful in cutting our use by 50% in the next 10 years, we'll only have the rabbit's chance of avoiding a catastrophe. Talk amongst yourself. Does that make sense to you in terms of the crisis that we're facing?
Don't forget to unmute yourself if you're trying to say something. And be sure to mute yourself after you're done.
Don't.
Did you hear?
Nope,
Question.
say it over.
Yes. How is he defining catastrophe? Is he defining catastrophe as extinction on the planet in 20 generations?
I think that's a great question. I don't have a scientific definition of catastrophe, but it's an important question. Some people, let me go back to Peter's presentation last week. Peter showed us that our awareness of the climate problem didn't spring up today. It's built on over 100 years of scientific research. It's been a public policy question since Richard Nixon, and so that's about 50 years. And now we're looking at this 10-year window. We have an argument in our group about, we abbreviate our concern as CC. Some people think of that as climate change. Some people think of it as climate crisis. Some people think of it as climate catastrophe. So here's my definition. Climate change, that's when Holland decided to move up tulip time by a week because we were getting STEM fest with the climate change. That's climate change. Catastrophe is when, say, San Francisco, Manila, Manhattan, and Mumbai are underwater. And there are, let's say, 1 billion climate refugees seeking a new home somewhere on Earth. That's what I call climate catastrophe. Somewhere between having to change the date of tulip time And having 1 billion climate refugees and many of our cities underwater, that's what I call the in-between time, which I call climate crisis time. What we do in the next 10 years determines where we wind up. The best we can hope for is a lot warmer climate than we have now because of all of our cars. But hopefully we won't have our major cities underwater and 1 billion climate refugees. It's the best answer I can give. So getting it right won't mean that we'll be back to tulip time the way it used to be. We'll still be a warmer planet, but a survivably warmer planet.
Don, I see there are a number of questions in the chat. Are you going to address those now, or are you going to wait?
Let's see.
Is it easy for you to see those, or do you want me or Mike to read them to you?
No, I think I've got them up here. Peg
Great.
wants to know, okay. So Jean says, is there a way to remove CO2 from the atmosphere? Well, one way is to wait about 1,000 years, but that may take longer than we want to wait. Plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere, but only, they take out the CO2 that's here close to Earth. We're talking about the CO2 way up in the stratosphere, right? And there aren't any trees up there. I think the question points to the fact that some people deal with this crisis time by hoping for a miraculous solution, either from God or from some unforeseen technological breakthrough. And I think, that's okay to hope for that. I don't want to bet on it myself. Let's see, I'm going to skip down to Diana Nelson. The bunnies will procreate in a heedless manner. Does that mean it's up to others to do more than their share? I think that's a political question. How optimistic are we that we will be able to rein in some of our habits to cut our CO2 in half in the next 10 years? Gary Morris says, there are technologies for carbon capture. The costs are enormous. And Gary, you're probably smarter than me. I don't know of any of them that are operating at scale, even if we had the costs to build them. But people are working hard on it because it would be a wonderful thing if it were to happen.
Don, this is Peter. Could I address that multiplying rabbits question?
Yeah.
We introduced you last week to the book Drawdown. And that book lists 100 things we can do to help make our world more survivable. All of them very doable. But it also ranks out of the 100, the top 10. And I'm going to give you just a second to guess what you think is number 6 on the list. Number 6 on the list is the education of girls on a global basis. The reason being that as people are more educated and as all members of the human family are educated and understand how to care for themselves and care for the world, they start making different decisions. And for many educated girls, that involves the delay of families or the start of a family, because they understand their place in the world differently than they did before, and they make different sorts of decisions. They also tend to aggregate in such a way as to pressure their governments to give them the solutions they want. And so educating everyone in the world is a strong factor in determining whether or not we're going to have a livable world.
So I'm going to wrap up this segment, if I may, and call attention, I guess, to a kind of semantical summary, right? Some people look at this scientific, the results of this scientific research, and they say it's a hoax. Some people say it may be true, but it doesn't matter because we'll get a miraculous or technological solution. Some people say it's real and we need to get to work. We're past, in my mind, climate change. Momentum is carrying us toward climate catastrophe. Strong action right now during a 10-year crisis period determines where we'll wind up. So that's what I hoped out of those 3 slides. Let me see if Susan and I can figure out how to get back to where I was on my slideshow. Oh, look at this. It might actually. Oh.
You're doing great. It's hard to go back and forth between screens. Okay, there you go.
Okay, so 3 slides, and I'll try to go quicker through these. So we have a problem. In a little bit, I'm going to say we have a solution. But in between those 2 steps, I'd like just a few quick slides to set some context. 3 slides about context for going forward. The first is just quickly calling your attention to, I think, a very familiar line for most of us from the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And whatever your faith perspective, I think that line creates a context for us. Because I think of, in Jesus' time, bread was energy, right? Bread was food. Bread was food for animals and people who did all the work. It was fuel for the donkey who pulled the cart. It was fuel for the human who plowed the field. So I think you can interpret this part of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily energy. Second, the word is give. It's a gift. We don't have a right to all the energy we want. It's not something to be taken for granted. It's a gift to be thankful for. And the pronoun here is plural. I'm not given energy. You're not given energy. We are given energy. It's a community issue. And finally, there's a reference to daily. And I like that perspective that nothing's forever. It's day by day. And the graph on your left is just an illustration of this point. What's been the dominant fuel from the founding of our country, 1776? For a long time, our fuel was wood, period. And then, after a while, it became coal. And after a while, it became petroleum. And after a while, it became natural gas. And perhaps in the not too distant future, it can become solar and other forms of renewable. So our bread changes every day in that sense. And just to quickly note again, the gift, the graph on the right, saying we have to get off of fossil fuel is not to treat fossil fuel as an evil thing. We've had 200 years of fossil fuel and it was a wonderful gift. You could find 100 graphs like the one on the right that show that the world is a much better place for having burned its fossil fuel. This graph happens to show the percentage of population that is living their life in abject poverty, $2 a day. It's declined from 50% to 10%. And that would not have happened without the burning of fossil fuels. So just because we want it changed doesn't mean we're not appreciative of the gifts of what we have received. Second, just because we say that what we're doing today isn't good enough, I don't mean to say that it's not good. It is good. It's just not good enough. But 4 quick points to illustrate. You may not know, but as of July 1, all the electricity used by the city of Holland, you know, the electricity that lights the stoplights, the electricity that turns on the light in the mayor's office, the electricity in the greenhouse, all of the city's electricity is now carbon neutral. We can talk about how that happened. It's something you can do for your electricity as well. The city has a home energy retrofit program, and they just doubled their rebates. And it's a very encouraging thing if you're interested in investing in making your home more energy efficient. Right now, maybe today was delivery, I don't know, but the city is finally buying a Tesla as a first step toward moving the city's fleet to electric vehicles. I don't know the exact count, but I would say there are dozens and dozens and dozens of vehicles the city owns, from snowplows to police cars to city employee cars that they use for all kinds of things. And you may hear a phrase from time to time, EWR, which is sort of insider talk. It stands for electric waste reduction. BPW has an electric waste reduction program, and next year they're planning to double their investment in that program. So just because it isn't good enough doesn't mean it's not good. And finally, getting back to Peter's elephants, I want to make this point as we move towards solutions. Personal piety, your own conservation efforts, your own efforts to reduce the energy you use, that's good, but it's not enough. Public policy is required. Consider this simple example. If you take a household that, say, has 3 people and 2 cars, a typical electric bill for that household would equate to roughly 4 tons per year of CO2 in the atmosphere. Similarly, their residential heating bill, and similarly, their gasoline. So you're talking about electricity, natural gas, and gasoline for a typical household. Adds up to about 16 tons. 2 cars, remember, 16 tons. As I recall Peter's graphic, 16 tons would be about 6 elephants. But that's for a household with 3 people. So a typical household and their use, heating, electricity, transportation in their car, comes out to about 2 elephants per person. But Peter told us that the city's average is 6 elephants per person. So where did your other elephants go? Your personal electric bill, Semco bill, and the money you spend at the gas station only accounts for about 1/3 of what you and your family put up in the sky. Where did the rest of it come from? So before we move on to solutions, are we having some discussion on that context? Give us this day our daily bread. Just because it's not good enough doesn't mean there aren't good things. And the solution is not personal piety, it's public policy. Comments?
Are you going to tell us where the other 4 elephants go?
Well, I think we can think it through together. Did you have dinner at a restaurant on 8th Street sometime? Did you go to the grocery store and get some stuff out of that freezer case that's drawing a huge amount of electricity? Did you go to the mall with its parking lot lit up by streetlights? Did you go to a job in a factory that was drawing a lot of energy? Did you go to a job in an office building that was well air conditioned? Am I getting there? The community's use of energy, I guess what I'm saying is what BPW would remind us, for example, in electricity, the amount of electricity they send to our homes is less than 20% of what they generate. More than 80% goes to commercial and industrial places. Does that help?
Don, this is Peter. If I could add a thought. When we get into discussions like this, we often refer to what's called embedded energy. In other words, how much energy did it take to produce a product that you eventually benefit from? And in that context, it's sometimes said that the most fuel efficient car you can own is the one you already have, regardless of what your miles per gallon may be. And that is related to the observation that all the energy it took to make all the thousands of components inside that vehicle will probably exceed the amount of energy you use driving it. And so that kind of shifts the conversation to us as consumers. How much stuff do I demand? Everything I use has got embedded energy in it. It had to come from somewhere. It benefits me indirectly, even though I don't use, burn it directly to heat my house. So where did the other elephants go? They probably were overseas somewhere making products that were eventually shipped into our country.
Just think of all those 18-wheelers coming into all the stores where you shop and buy your stuff, right?
Does that mean that the effort to eliminate internal combustion engines in cars is just a drop in the bucket?
No, I think what it means is I drive a 10-year-old SUV. I'm dying to buy a Tesla, but I've got 50,000 miles left on my SUV, and I'm going to have to wait to be efficiently using all of the energy that went into making my 10-year-old car 10 years ago. When it's really worn out, maybe then I'll get my Tesla.
Or as an intermediate strategy, simply buy a used electric car.
There you go. So I don't know where you're sitting, but I have a big clock on my dining room table here that's reminding me that I have more to say and time is running out. I'm happy to take more time for conversation, but I want to get to the point where I think you play a critical role in this story. We've talked about the fact that we have a problem, soon to become a catastrophe, if we don't handle the crisis phase right. We've talked about we're operating in a context of appreciation for what we have, even as we say we have to make changes. But now I want to talk about the real point, which is we have solutions, people. And we need to give our political leaders permission to implement the solutions. So three quick slides on the solutions. I don't know if every major economist who has studied this problem, liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican, every Nobel laureate in economics, every secretary of the Treasury in the history of the country, it's absolutely unanimous that the best solution is something called fee and dividend. And there are 4 quick points in the fee and dividend solution. If carbon is the problem, then put a fee on it when carbon enters our economy. If you dig up coal and want to use it as an entry into our economy, pay a fee. If the oil tanker comes in and you want to use that oil, enter it into our economy, pay a fee one time at the origin of the carbon into our economy. In doing so, we'll collect a lot of money, but this is a revenue neutral solution. All that money goes into a huge pot, and every year that pot is divided equally among all the people in the United States. You get your money back. The point of this is the fee drives up the cost. The economy will therefore have incentives for everyone to more carefully consider how they're using carbon. It won't be an extra tax because we all get it back. And the economists say, far better than regulation and bureaucracy, just put a price on the thing you don't want. And even if you give the money back to people, they'll still make wiser choices. Ford Motor Company will find a way to build a car using less carbon. Electric vehicles will become more popular, and so forth. There is a bill in the US Congress right now, HR 763, that, if enacted, would put this into practice. There is a national and international organization called CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby. We have a chapter here in Holland. Peter is a leader of it, that advocates. There are chapters like that in every congressional district in the country. Our chapter's job is to lobby Bill Huizenga to vote for HR 763 and begin the fee and dividend program. In the meantime, we as a local community have a community energy plan whose current goal is to cut our carbon emissions in half by 2050. We have a local organization called the Holland Climate Collaborative that, in the light of what we've been discussing for the last hour, says, good goal, wrong year. Cut our community's carbon dioxide emissions in half, not by 2050, but by 2030. This is a doable goal. Holland City Council has recently decided to take one of their regular review looks at the community energy plan and have appointed a strategic team to do that for them. The team has one of 2 ways it could go. It's most likely to go about saying, how could we tinker around our plans to make them a little bit better? The way the Holland Climate Collaborative would like them to go is to say, don't tinker on individual programs, change the overall goal. So if Congress would pass HR 763 and the City Council would change our goal, I think we'd be well on our way to a solution. I don't want to belabor this, but let's just take a quick point at what this would mean for us. I think if you come up close to your screen, you can read that green graph down on the bottom. What if we really had a fee on carbon? And how would that affect families? Well, it depends on which quintile you're in. If you're a rich family, you buy a lot more stuff with carbon in it than a poor family. So you're going to pay a higher fee. But when the government redistributes that fee, they redistribute it equally among everybody. So it has the side benefit of giving a little bit of relief to low-income families. But if you squint at this graph, you'll see that the dark green represents the number of people who benefit financially from this plan, and the light green represents the number of people who lose, but the footnote says they lose less than 0.2% of their income. So this is not, despite what people might initially think, a big hit on anybody at all. Most people gain. If they lose, it's less than 1% of their income. And to the degree that it redistributes the income a little bit, it benefits the ALICE people, the asset limited, income constrained, employed. I think that's a good thing. The graph on the right is the one Peter showed us last time for our local carbon emissions. The red line going up and up and up is sort of what happens if we don't do anything. The orange line is what the current city goal is, and the black line is the goal that we're proposing, that science is proposing, reducing by half every decade. And, you know, it's like with COVID. What did they say? It's basic, right? Wash your hands, wear a mask, maintain social distancing. For the CEP goal, it's just as basic. Invest in efficiency. Electrify everything. I'm in the process of getting bids now to replace my gas furnace with an electric heat pump, for example. Why electrify everything? Because unlike natural gas or gasoline for an internal combustion engine, if I'm running everything on electricity, I can sign up for 100% renewable electricity and become carbon neutral. So why aren't they doing it if this makes sense? What's the problem? I'm not a community leader. I'm not on the city council or in the US Congress, but my sense is they're afraid. We've got a huge problem and an obvious solution. Why aren't they acting on it? They're afraid that it will be unpopular. They're afraid of the polls. And they're afraid of the cost. They think it will be something that ruins our economy. If you squint up close at your computer screen, you can read some of these polls, but the point is clear. Poll after poll after poll say people want our leaders to do this. As Peter says, there's no lobby for dirty air. People want their leaders to do this. And yet, every local leader, many of the local political leaders I talk to here in Holland say, Don, I get it, I'm on your side, but you know, it would be so unpopular here in Holland. So much so that they say, I, local leader, don't even dare utter the phrase climate change. Could it be that we've let such a self-fulfilling prophecy dominate our local decision-making? How can we give our leaders the courage to say climate change and discover that most of the people would rally around them and support them? Again, if you squint at the graphs on the right-hand side, they just make two quick points. Under cost, that top graph You see the bright yellow line. That's the cost of solar energy. It runs from 2000 and I think it's maybe 2000. Way more expensive than the other three lines, right? But it's plummeted so that right now, solar energy is cheaper than coal. It's cheaper than natural gas. It's not the most expensive. It's the cheapest. And the little bar graph down in the bottom right just illustrates what we've already mentioned. An electric car may cost more money now, although that's predicted to end in a few years. But even if it costs you more money to buy now, it costs less than 50% to fuel it. It has way less maintenance cost because there are far fewer parts. And of course, it emits fewer emissions. So, we've got a problem, we've got a context, we've got solutions, we've got nervous politicians. How do we give our politicians permission to make the decisions that they're afraid to make? I'm open for your comments.
One of the things that I think can change politicians' mind is just what's happening right now with the wildfires and the storms on the southeast coast of the country. And I think that might be a kind of a wake-up call for some of these politicians around the line about whether climate change is a hoax or all that kind of thing. So I think seeing is believing in a sense, and I think that is changing some minds, hopefully.
Don, I don't know if it's generally accepted, but often people will say politics begins at home, and I think we have an election coming up in a very few days. Have you talked to Berghoff in terms of how he stands on climate change, and what kind of a reception are you getting from him?
I think the short answer is his position is much better than Bill Eisinger's.
This is Peter. I could add that the Climate Witness Project, which originated years ago in the Christian Reformed Church and has gone more ecumenical since then, has scheduled a candidates forum. I believe it's on October 6th. They invited both Huizenga and Berghoff to speak to their views on climate. Berghoff has accepted the invitation, and it's scheduled for, I want to say, October 6th at about 7. Bill Huizenga is not available for that conversation. But in order to know Brian's mind, he is going to be questioned on that point.
This is Joanne Patterson, and I'm wondering if taking a survey in Holland as to how people feel about sustainability, climate change, to see how many minds need to be open to this, I guess.
And to quote those numbers to the city council.
There are a number of organizations that do surveys, and one that Peter has called my attention to does them nationally, but breaks the results down by state and county. Nationally, it's like 70%. When you look at Ottawa County in that survey, it drops to about 50%. But Holland City is, I would think, more on the ball than the county overall. So if I see a number of 50% in Ottawa County supporting climate action, I'm thinking it's well more than 50% in the city of Holland. the last line in this slide here talked about helping us work with local leaders and needing your home address. And some of you were kind enough to provide your home address. I think about 15 of you did. And with a home address, I can run that through a little computer program and realize, for example, that 2 of you live in Ward 1 in Holland. Your congressman, your city council member is Mike Trethewey. 2 of you live in Ward 2. Your council member is Jay Peters. 1 of you lives in Ward 3, Raul Garcia. 1 lives in Ward 4, Nikki Aronson. 2 live in Ward 5, Scott Corbin. And 1 lives in Ward 6, Dave Hoekstra. Have you talked to your council member about this? 1 of you lives in Holland Township, 1 in Laketown Township, 4 in Park Township, and 1 in Saugatuck Township. Each of those townships has a board of trustees that I think in Park and Holland Township, they have elections coming up in a month for their township members. So the altar call today is to say the way our local and congressional leaders get permission to implement the solutions is for them to discover that their constituents are not afraid of it. They believe climate change is real and they want them to take action. And the action that Peter and I want to urge you to think about is not to become a climate scientist or even a community organizer. Just tell your personal story, okay? For example, there's lower right, there's a picture of some trees on fire. I could talk forever about forest fires in general, or I could say to my council member, the true story. My son, his wife, and my 2 little grandchildren live in Santa Cruz, California, and they are dodging the wildfires constantly for the past month. Move to relatives on one side of the mountains, move to relatives on the other side of the mountains, breathe the bad air. I think that moves my city council member more than any study I could quote. It's a story. Stories change people. The picture on the top right is to remind me to tell you about a meeting that Peter and I and Deborah Williamson had with a very significant leader on our city council. I don't need to mention names. When we came to that person to say, we're concerned about climate change, what can we do to motivate you to take action? And he was very, very plain. He said, don't send me statistics, don't send me scientific reports, don't send me studies. I agree with you, but I don't want to use the word climate change because it might turn people off. He said, but the thing that would move me and that would help me move others are stories. Send me your stories. Okay. So we asked for homework that you think about something in your own life or your family or something you heard, a simple story. We also sent you stories from the last several months in a couple of newspapers. Maybe you had a chance to look at them. Some of them about the dangers of climate change, some of them about the solutions being implemented elsewhere. Let me be as direct as I can. I'm asking you to take a newspaper story or a personal story and send it to your local political leader with a personal note, 25 words or less. My son is living in the midst of the fires in California, I want you to do something about climate change. I saw this story in the New York Times yesterday. It reminds me that I want you to do something about climate change. That's all. You don't have to become an expert. You don't have to become an orator. A personal note with a personal story. And if we're busy building a list of 1,000 people who say they would do that, can you imagine what would happen in city council if 1,000 people once a month sent a short personal story? So react. Crazy? Reasonable? What's your personal story? One of those newspaper articles caught your eye? You have the link right with it. You could just send the link in an email to your city council person, your park township person, and say, this story caught my eye. I hope you'll take action on climate change. Stop talking, Don, and let the people say.
Don, you mentioned the ward representatives on city council, but there are 2 at-large people too. And I know for a fact that Lynn Raymond is very much involved in her concern.
That's correct. The mayor is really the 3rd large person. If you want to send it to all 9 city council people, on this next slide, you see an email address, publiccomment@cityofholland.com. Anything you send to that email address will get distributed to all the members of the city council, and it will get recorded in the minutes of the next city council meeting.
Thank you.
Speaking of articles in the New York Times, on September 23rd, Wednesday, a group of senators led by Edward Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, called on the commission to ensure that the moderators ask about climate change on Tuesday, tomorrow's debate. And I think it's very important to remember not only locally, but we can speak our voice in how we vote nationally. So there was a letter signed by 37 lawmakers who happen to be all Democrats, but I won't get into that. So I have the letter, but it would be available on the New York Times. And also, this Time magazine has a lot of articles on climate change. And it's a double issue, and it's July 20 and July 27, 2020. And probably a lot of these are available online also.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So someone unmute and speak a short personal story of what you've noticed about climate change, how it has affected you or people you know and love.
I wanted to add that climate change is also affecting hunger issues. Along with Alvis Gear, who I know is on this class, and we belong to the Holland bread team, and one of the things that we've been studying over the last month or so is the effects that climate change has on the issues of hunger. And hunger is being undone. Some of the progress that has been made is being undone by climate change. So that was kind of the tack that I took in my own letters.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely true.
Don, you've maintained correctly that that the stories we tell can give politicians permission to implement what they think of as unpopular solutions. But I would accuse you of being a little bit too kind. I think some of the politicians who say, well, I haven't heard enough stories or I haven't heard enough constituents are not mentioning the fact that there are tremendous economic and organizational pressures placed on them by certain national organizations that are intensely denying that climate is an issue. And until those pressures can be countermanded by either voter unrest or countervailing economic contributions, until they see that there's a penalty for continuing to deny that, they'll say anything they have to keep you quiet, but they're not going to change their behavior.
And I'd like to, can I add something to that? Today in the New York Times opinion area, there's a column by a current member of the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, appointed by Trump. I don't know if she's still employed there today after this article, but she was as of earlier today, talking about transparency by businesses about the risks of climate change. Businesses are required to be transparent about certain risks that might affect their future profitability, et cetera, et cetera. So, making a case that businesses know a lot about climate change that they're not saying, they're not telling their investors, et cetera. So we as people who have 401ks, et cetera, can have some impact by how we invest, whether we choose ESG, mutual funds, et cetera, in that regard too.
I think those are excellent points. The people in office, some of the people in office enjoy being in office because they get gifts from people who have financial interest in not doing something about climate change. I don't know what I can do about that, but I do know that those people, those public servants, won't get those gifts if they're not in office. And I can influence whether they stay in office or not. And the minute that politician, that community leader, I don't want to say they're bad, but the minute that elected person senses that more constituents want him to do something than don't, the minute that community leader senses that his or her ability to stay in office would be threatened by their unwillingness to act on climate change, that's the day they'll start to act. And I only say that because that's what they've told me. And Peter has met with Bill Huizenga and his staff. I've had the opportunity, some of the rest of you have. I talked to city council members, and they look straight back at you and say, yeah, but you're just a small group. I had a council member look at us and say, yeah, you're just a small number of people complaining. I get complaints about closing the pickle courts. How do I know you represent anything more than a small group? This is not from bad people. It's their job to have their sense on what their constituents want. And right now, they don't believe that we want climate change. Indeed, they think if they utter the phrase climate change, they'll endanger their reelection. You can search the City of Holland's website from beginning to end and never find the phrase climate change. You can search the BPW website from beginning to end and never find the phrase climate change. You can pull every brochure off the brochure rack about every program in City Hall and never find the word climate change. How can this be? They haven't heard from us. Not with arguments and science, but in a way that builds a sense in their minds that the people personally care. They have family and friends who are impacted by climate change. They care about the impact of climate change on their 401ks and on the starving people in Africa, whatever is your concern. It doesn't take more than 25 words in an email. And honestly, they may or may not read your email, but they'll count the number of emails they get. And I'm asking with this slide, quite literally, think about your calendar. You do something on your calendar every week. I don't know what it is. You know, clean the bathroom or vacuum or whatever. Wherever that is on your calendar, consider adding another item on that weekly calendar. I'm going to send a 25-word email to public comment at City of Holland. It doesn't have to be anything more than forwarding an article. Your calendar has some things you do monthly, pay your bills, whatever. Put it on your monthly calendar. On your smartphone, hit repeat monthly. Call Bill. Quarterly, I've lived in Holland decades. I've never heard of a ward meeting. Have you been invited to a ward meeting? Have you organized a ward meeting where you say, hey, I've got a dozen people from Ward 3. Raul, will you meet with us so we can talk to you about our concerns about climate change? Again, the title of this presentation was 1,000 Storytellers. I'm a scientist and a mathematician, so I guess I do get hung up on numbers. But we're accumulating a list, and we're over 500 and on our way to 1,000 of people who we know care. And if we could get these things on their calendar, City Council will respond, and maybe even Bill Heisinger. I know that in part because I know that one of you who's listening in on this is, excuse me, Deborah Williamson. And back in December, some of us said, how can we make this a priority for City Council? They set their annual priorities in January. And Deborah Williamson simply said, we're going to go to every City Council meeting between now and then and use the public comment period to ask them to make this a priority. She had bright yellow cards printed. She lined up some friends. She did that, and in a matter of a couple of months, climate concerns became an official priority of the City Council because Deborah and a dozen people talked to them, lobbied them, sent them emails. Deborah, I don't mean to steal your thunder, but can you comment on that?
I'll try. You know, it started out for me 50 years ago. I was still in college and I was learning about the environment and ecology. And I moved to a farm to live an intentional environmental lifestyle. Then 45 years ago, my family was poisoned by PBB. Those of you who were in Michigan at that time might have heard of polybrominated biphenyls and how that got into the food system. So I realized you cannot separate yourself. You're part of a community. So the next 45 years, I spent my life trying to work on making community better. But my lesson during that period was that you can't make a community better unless there's community engagement. So a few years ago, I retired and I had time to kind of return to that environmental issue by reading, meeting a lot of people, joining Citizens Climate Lobby, meeting Don, meeting Peter and others. And I really started focusing on the urgency. And why wasn't it that people were urgent about this situation? And that's what led me to do that action, along with some encouragement from Don and Peter. And it did work. I've had a lot of personal conversations with individual council people, and they're all waiting. They're waiting to hear from others. They're waiting to develop the courage to move forward. So ditto on what Don just said, you know, add it to your calendar. It's important. And Don, would you take a minute to talk about Wednesday's Zoom meeting and invite everybody here to come to that? It's 5:30 this Wednesday in 2 days.
Thank you. It's up on my screen. I hope it's on your screen. Wednesday, this week, this is one of the rare months when there are 5 Wednesdays. That means City Council has nothing to do on Wednesday because it's the 5th Wednesday, so they don't have a meeting. We have lined up some people who are doing what we're trying to do in Holland, but have more experience than we do. We have a representative from Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor has very aggressive carbon neutral programs going. We have a representative from Traverse City, which is much more heavily invested in solar energy and carbon neutrality than we are. And we have someone from Iowa who has 20 years of experience as a Republican in Iowa. Iowa is a state that is one of the top states in the country for renewable energy. Those 3 people are going to be on the other end of a Zoom call starting at 5:30 on Wednesday. Our hope is that members of the City Council and the Strategic Development Team will submit some questions in writing about their concerns so that these folks can respond to them. We invite you also to submit your questions in writing. The Zoom link is blank right now because I haven't gotten the email yet about what the Zoom link will be, but we'll get it out to you all hopefully by the end of the day today. There's a message right there. If City Council discovers that there's 50 people in Holland who on short notice decided they wanted to hear what leaders from other Midwest communities had to say, that in itself would send a message. So we hope that you join us.
I guess you've answered my question. I was wondering about a link to get in. Thank you.
I think
John, I'd like to make an offer that there have been a couple important email addresses and things that have come up on your slideshow. When you get the Zoom link, provide it to me and I will send an email to everybody who's attending this class that will have a very easy, just click on the link and it'll take you to the Zoom, to this Zoom meeting. So if you're concerned about what you've seen, I'll get that out to everyone.
That's Susan, right, at HASP?
That's correct.
Wonderful, Susan, thank you.
Why don't you send it to all HASP members?
I will make an offer to talk to Kim about that. I have no problem doing that. I think that's a fantastic idea. I don't know without context whether Kim would, I just don't know how that would work. And since I'm new, I will say that I will run that past her. I think that it might be a really great way of getting the word out. But for now, I can definitely commit to getting the information to everybody who has attended this class.
And we're also, Peter and I, grateful to HASP for recording our 2 presentations so that that at least creates the theoretical potential of being able to share this message more widely through sharing the recording.
Don, could I add one thing near the end here?
Please.
I wanted to return to your notion of storytelling, because I would like this group to realize that your memory bank is one of the most valuable resources we have in this conversation. I was listening to a presenter recently who pointed out that we now live in a 10% world. Take anything in the world and it's 90% less than it was within 100 years ago. 90% of the big fish, sharks, sailfish, whatever in the oceans are gone. 90% of birds are gone. 90% of our topsoil is gone. We're living in a 10% world with the illusion that we're rich. You are the folks who have been around long enough to know that ain't so, and somehow need to communicate that to younger generations. Let me just tell a quick personal story. When I was a child, my father would take us on Labor Day camping trips to Mears State Park in Pentwater. And when we rolled out of our tent in the morning, we would see a huge flock of gulls headed out the channel. They were following the commercial fishing boat that set out every morning from Pentwater Lake, did commercial fishing in Lake Michigan. Now I want to challenge you, when is the last time you've seen a commercial fishing boat in Lake Michigan? And you aren't gonna find them because that's how much we've lost. You and your memory bank have stories like that, whether you grew up on the farm or whether you grew up on those winters. My grandchildren think I'm an old fogey because I tell them I really did walk to school through 3-foot snow drifts every day. There was that much more winter. Now, somehow we need to communicate the reality of this trajectory we're on. And your stories are the only minds in the community that hold that trajectory. You need to tell those stories because we're not old fogies. That stuff really was true. And the trajectory we're on means we'll be in even less than 10% world 5 years from now. So I encourage you to just kind of feel secure and safe in remembering and sharing those memories.
And I guess my final note on encouraging you to share personal stories. In this time, we're kind of all hardened to the news that over 200,000 people in the United States have died of COVID. But what really zeroes us in is when it's somebody we know. And so statistics don't move politicians. Personal stories do. Sending them an email that says, I'm upset about 200,000 COVID deaths, well, it hasn't gotten us very far. But sending them an email that says, my brother, my sister, my daughter, whatever, just died of COVID, you'll get a response. And I don't mean to be morbid about that, but the point that statistics and studies do not move the politicians. If so, it would have happened 50 years ago. Your stories will move them. Please share them. Thank you for listening. We're over time. Susan?
Yes.
Thank you.
both.
Thanks so much, Don, Peter. Great 2 sessions.
Well, we will go ahead and I will close the class, but let's everybody give a round of applause. I know a lot of people are muted, but thank you so much for your amazing contribution.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was fun.
Very depressing.
I know it.
Thanks, John.